Hi, and welcome back to another tutorial on file operations. We're going to take a look at how to read in three integers at a time. So here in main, right, we've got our three integers, x, y, and z. They're going to say represent coordinates in 3D space. We've got our file object. We're going to open this file called coordinates.txt. Let me open that file there. So I've got a coordinates.txt and a coordinates d with double. So let's look at the one with integers. So we've got then 0, 0, 0, right? 1 minus 13, 9. So we've got three integers per line. We don't have to have three integers per line to read three integers. I just grouped it that way to make it easy to read. What we would expect is once we've declared these three integers, opened our file, made sure it opened correctly. Now what we're doing here is we're chaining the extraction operator together. And we're saying in file object, go to the file and read in some data. Store the first piece of data you read. It should be integer data because x is an int type. Store it into x. Then read the next piece of data. You store that into y, and read the next piece of data. Store that into a z. Right? It's going to look for data that it convert from character format to integer format. And if it's successful, if it reads all three, we'll print out those values when the while loop ends. So it will end then when it gets the file, or if there's some bad data in here. There isn't any bad data at this time, so we should see these three sets of values print out. So let's just go ahead and run the executable. When we do, we can see, right, here's our values of x, y, and z, 0, 0, 0, right, 1 minus 13, 9, 7, 2, and 4. The while loop ended. We can see then that our end of file flag was set because we reached the end of file. As a reminder, whenever we reach the end of file, the fail bit is also set as well. For us, the important criterion was, did we get all the way through the file? Yes, because the end of file bit was set. So we print out this message, successfully read all file data. Now I'm rushing through this a little bit in terms of this program, but this is based on, if you've seen the previous tutorial where we read one integer at a time and we discussed these messages, right, that we were using and these flags that we were using to print things out. And of course, we close the file before we end. So let's go ahead and look at our coordinates file. Like I said, these don't all have, these could all be on the same line. Right? As a reminder, when it tries to read in integer data, right, what it does is it skips over any leading white space. So I put a tab here. It's going to skip over that tab, leading white space, and look for something that looks like an integer. And it's going to say, oh, well, this first character, that's numeric, that's a 0, that looks like an integer. It's going to keep reading until it detects either non-numeric data or white space. And so there's a blank space here. The other thing is when it starts to read an integer, at the beginning, if there's a non-numeric character, such as a plus or minus sign, that is legitimate as well for an integer, so that won't cause it to fail to read. Again, right, if I just save then the data file, we rerun our executable, well, we get the very same output here because it really doesn't matter how it's stored in the file. We could do everything on one line. Like, you could play with that. I won't play with that too much. Right. The one thing that happens is, I'm going to put these back on 3 line. What happens here if we fail to read, instead of a number, what if somebody had typed, what if there was a capital Z in the file? So what we should see happening is it's going to successfully read these first 3 values. We should see those print out. What we should see is the while loop fail, in file fail then to read this Z value, and we will not see that as part of our output. So let me save this. Let's clear this. Let's rerun our executable. Right, so you can see then, right, we were able then to successfully read X, Y, and Z. It failed to read when it encountered, so when I said X, Y, and Z, not to be confusing, the numbers 0, 0, 0 into our variables X, Y, and Z. But here, because we had typed a non-integer value, this failed to read, which then, right, this was the second time through the loop. This failed. We don't see it trying to print anything out because this failed. Now, we don't know where it failed. We don't know if it failed reading X or Y or Z. We don't know that. But what we do know is we see this message printed out here, failed to read the end of file. Right? So that's why we're checking here. If in file.end of file, if that's true, we know we successfully made it to the end of the file. But if it's not, we know that we failed to read in all our data. Of course, then as a programmer, we have to decide, well, what can we do? Is there anything we can do? We can't necessarily do anything to recover. Chances are we would just print out some sort of error message and then close our file. And that's what we've done here, right? We're not doing any processing with that particular data. Right? So that then works for reading in 3 integers. If we were to change the data type of this to a double, and so I have this other file here, coordinates d.txt, so I need to change the name of this input file to coordinates d.txt. Well, we should try to read in these doubles here, and even though that looks like an integer, it could still interpret that as a floating point type. It's just a whole number. Now, if that's the case, I did make a change to our file. Let me rebuild it. Let's rerun it. And now you can see, right, we successfully read in this line of data stored in X, Y, and Z. Then we loop back through, read in this line of data stored in X, Y, and Z, the same way with the third line there. When we ended, right, we did trip. We did hit the EO end of file. So like I said, whenever you save a file, then the text editor program you're working with, right, it puts an end of file character in there. We can't physically see that end of file character, but it is in there. And so that has been detected, and that's why that stream is set. Right? So that's just an example then of how, right, sometimes we don't want to read in just one piece of data at a time. Sometimes our data is organized in a certain way. Right? Next tutorial, I'll show you, you can mix data types, like we could read an integer, then a double. The idea is if you chain everything together to match what's in your file, and you have to know some information, right? When somebody gives you a file, if you create your own, you know how you created it. But if you're given a file, like if you're in a production environment or working on a project and somebody says, hey, I need to write you need to write some code to read this data from the file, they need to tell you how the file is structured so that you can appropriately read it in. All right, hopefully you found this helpful. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial. Go ahead and practice. I always forgot to say in the others, you need to type this code in and practice yourself. Practice doing this. This is how we get better, by writing this code. All right, thank you.